Glad to have you on my webinar, Nick. You are Chief Evangelist at Google. Not every company has Chief Evangelists. Can you explain us what your job is at Google, what you are doing on a day-to-day basis? You're on mute. Let's give Nick a few seconds to... Now we hear you. Perfect.
All right. Yeah, listen, well, thanks for having me, first of all. And second of all, like, this is the coolest background ever. I want a background as nice as yours. And third, thank you for inviting me here. We've done some really great work together, and I'm really proud to be here and partnering with you on this webinar. Yeah, I'm Chief Evangelist. What I do, I talk to CMOs and CFOs and CEOs all day and help them accelerate their digital transformation strategy. So whether it's media and advertising, whether it's data, whether it's customer experience, just to try to help them deliver more value to the customers, drive profitability, build a better brand by using the best practices from all around the world in every industry.
Nick, it seems that today we are experiencing quite some disruption in our industry, and it feels as if we are seeing a pace of change we haven't experienced before, and there are a few influence factors driving this change. One is, of course, the pandemic. We saw a massive increase in e-commerce penetration. So now digital advertising in the US is, I think, 55% of the overall advertising budget. A second factor is that previously, in the very early days, and I do remember sitting in front of massive Excel sheets to manage keywords and ads, the key differentiator was like dominate the workflow, scale large campaigns, automate the workflow. And now AI has taken over. So to some extent, we lost control, but we also gained efficiency through this better AI-based system. And a third one is for sure privacy-related restrictions. We saw iOS updates. We're heading into a cookieless world. And there are probably new ways to measure success, but also to target customers. And these three factors combined lead to this major change we are currently observing. Let's uncover the crystal ball and discuss where all this is heading, what the future of marketing is. And my specific question is, where do you see our industry, let's say in 5 years from now?
Yeah, but look, I'll give you a personal point of view, and of course, any forecast is going to be wrong. But I think there's at least three really important themes. The first one is obviously machine learning, and as you mentioned, a relatively high percentage of ads are online today, and that's going to keep growing. But in 5 years, even the ads, when they're not online, will also be digital, right? There's more digital billboards being bought, connected TVs, and so on and so forth. So I think it's not that far of a leap to think that in 5 years, a very high percentage of the ads that advertisers will buy will be optimized through machine learning. Whether you're buying a YouTube ad or a TV ad or a billboard ad, the machine will be part of it. And obviously, machine learning is also improving really quickly every year. Over the past few years, it's been improving, and doubling in power very, very quickly. So we expect that to continue, not at the same rate. So you've got, more ads automated through machine learning. You've got machine learning improving. So that's a really big trend, obviously. The second one is the kind of difference between brand and performance is starting to blur. And I think that's a really, really interesting one. For those of you who are more performance advertisers on this call, it's time to really look into branding, because a lot of the skills you've built as really savvy performance advertisers can be used for branding as well. For example, if you can see, the number of searches for your brand that are going up, live, or near live, near real time during a campaign, you can optimize using that like you were for profitability or for ROI, for example. So I think, and if you're more of a brand advertiser, as you're doing more and more D2C, you'll start doing more performance advertising as well. So, we used to really have, I'm a performance advertiser at heart, and I didn't really understand, frankly, until recently, brand advertising. But by really leaning into it and really seeing the value of it, I've started to really believe in it more, and also see very different best practices, the traditional best practices of branding. So theme number 2 is performance and brand starting to merge, and then the really important idea of having a full funnel marketing strategy, right? Yes, making money in the short term or from a customer lifetime value perspective on performance, but also in the medium and long term, driving our brand in a way that drives massive loyalty, improvements in conversions, and so on and so forth. And then the third theme is a real shift in how creative is done, right? If you think about in the age of machine learning, a lot of the media will be bought more and more automatically. One of the most important things you can do is really improve the creative. And now the creative canvas you have to play with, whether it's social ads, whether it's search ads, whether it's YouTube ads, is much broader and much more malleable, but also more complex than a more traditional creative canvas. So ad personalization, ad sequencing, all these things are really important. I'll give you an example on search. I can imagine a hotel company whose ads used to say come to our hotel, it's comfortable and save money. But now if you're at an airport, when we resume flying more, and you search for hotel near me, and the ad says, your flight got canceled at JFK, ? We have, the nearest hotel is 1.2 miles away. We have 17 rooms available. It will cost you $79 a night. That kind of ad, which is personalized, yes, but I think even more importantly, really helpful, is very different from an average search ad, if you will. So one of the really big themes of the next 5 years is just a deep exploration in what's possible with creative, but also the idea that machine learning is going to start having a bigger impact on the actual creation of creative. Again, on search, we're doing amazing things, right? Where we take, with responsive search ads, for example, where we take fragments of search ads and combine them together using machine learning. And with dynamic search ads, we actually kind of write the ads using machine learning. So you'll see a lot more of that happening, I think, on search, on display, and potentially, if machine learning keeps improving, machines, really playing a big part in video ads as well. So 3 themes, right? Automation, full funnel, and machine learning driven creative.
I have a follow-up question actually later on. I'd like to cover the brand advertising versus performance advertising and pick up your point a little bit. On the creative side, quick question on that. Do you see AI putting creatives together from scratch to end, or is it rather that humans will design things and machines figure out which creatives to show to which audience?
Yeah, I think for the foreseeable future, it's more the former, but not so much like putting full ads together. I think atomizing the ads, if you will, putting fragments of ads together. Like if you take a banner ad, for example, right now you can put hundreds of different logos, and basically doing fragments of ads and having machines recombine the ads in real time. So I think that's clearly going to happen across. It's happening on search already. It's going to keep improving. It's happening on display. It's going to keep improving. It's happening on video. It's going to keep improving as well. There are some early efforts of having machine learning write ads completely from scratch. I think in search, we're seeing some good results already. I think in display, that's going to happen in the next 5 years. It's hard to say on video. It's much more complex. But I wouldn't count it out. I wouldn't count out the idea that a machine can create an ad from scratch, but then some deep review from humans is probably going to be necessary to keep improving it. But maybe the machine in the next few years can take the ad to 80%, by using fragments of videos. But that's in its really early days.
I mean, for our audience, probably most performance advertisers familiar with text ads, we've always worked with templates where you have different elements, whatever. You reflect the product category, you reflect the color, material, whatsoever. If I understand you correctly, you see this happening on the creative side as well, that you have different placeholders and you can change colors, you can change wording, you can change the image, and machines are very, very good to figure out how responsive are users to these ads, right? And this way we can optimize ads and tailor them for different targets. Makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's happening on search and display today, and it's going to keep improving, but it's good today already. But in video, I think it's going to take a little longer. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the first part. So AI is taking over, and I mean, you're pretty aware of this. I'm sure a couple of years ago when Google started pushing the smart bidding features, tROAS, lots of people in the market were scared first because it took control away from them, especially the really good ones who had built their proprietary bidding systems and had a competitive edge through things they have built. And now Google rolled out this bidding solution, and some were very hesitant because it felt like Google was leveling the playing field. And the early adopters, they got a huge impact on their performance because the algorithm just performed better. So everyone kept joining the party because it was just a superior bidding system. But still, to some extent, companies want to differentiate themselves. What skills do you see will the marketer of the future need to thrive in an AI-based world?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. I think it's actually the most important question. And it's the number one question I get from our really savvy CMOs, right? How do I differentiate? I mean, how do I gain market share? How do I gain, profitability? How do I increase customer lifetime value? How do I build a better brand in the age of machine learning advertising? So let me kind of highlight a number of areas that I think are really, really critical. Because machine learning in the end, right, can do things on your behalf, but it doesn't know what to do. It doesn't know, the business economics. It doesn't know a lot of things. So the combination of the machine and a lot of human ingenuity is what really matters. But human ingenuity plays in the right direction, right? Not necessarily finding new keywords or bidding keywords, but doing other things. So let me list some of those things. Number one, the business thinking. Like, what is the KPI you're asking the machine to optimize to? It's dramatic, the changes that we see when an advertiser goes from, I want a really high ROI to I want maximum profitability. Just the media, imagine changing nothing. Like, the media doesn't change, right? You're just changing a KPI the machine is optimizing to. And we see just dramatic impact for many, many advertisers. So I'd say the most important thing in the age of machine learning advertising is strong alignment between the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, the agency, and Google, right? And then your other media partners as well. What is the right dashboard for you? And you have the best dashboard in your industry. In my view, by the way, on performance advertising, for many advertisers, the best dashboard is customer lifetime value profitability. So that's one. Are you asking the machine to do the right thing? How do you fit in profitability? That's a great question, Evan. So yeah, so imagine somebody clicks on a Google ad, right, and they go on a site and they buy something if you're in e-commerce, or they fill out a form if you're in the lead generation business, or they become a member if you're in the membership business. At that moment, when you acquire that customer, right, the first time you acquire that customer, and this is some of the work that Crealytics has done, right? You take the data that you have about that customer and you're trying to forecast their customer lifetime value, right? So like Andreas and Nick both come to the site, they both join as new members, right? We join a streaming service, for example, right? And we both take the same program. It's like $17 a month, for example. But for whatever reason, the business intelligence team that is working for this company detects that Andreas is going to stay for 3 years and I'm going to churn after a month. So now Andreas is worth $500 a profit and Nick is worth $17 a profit. You pass that back to our target ROAS algorithm, and then you can bid using that data. So basically, instead of passing the short-term revenue, you pass the long-term profit. You can pass both if you want, but you bid to the long-term profit. So that's my second point. My second point is if you're going to try to optimize to maximum profitability, for example, you have to have the right data. So the second skill set you have to have is really understanding smart data, not necessarily big data. There's so many companies who get stuck in multi-year data projects that don't yield anything. So, but in advertising, if you move from sharing revenue to just sharing margin data, for example, the odds are your margin will go up a lot. And then if you share customer lifetime value data, the odds are customer lifetime value will go up. If you share store data, not just online data, right, your omnichannel revenues are likely to go up. So the second thing is smart data. Do you have a team of people who can get, what is the one piece of data we need right now to really improve our profit? Can we get it quickly? Can we test it? Can we roll it out? As opposed to, it takes a year to even find the data kind of thing. Number three, I'd say the creative, right now, the creative, there's a lot of work that's been done where creative, impacts 50 to 70% of the impact of a campaign, whether it's performance or brand. I think that's even heightened in the age of machine learning advertising. So, most advertisers should spend a lot more time than they do on optimizing creative. So that's the third piece. The fourth piece is customer experience. If you're competing against somebody else in your industry and their conversion rate is 50% higher than yours and their lifetime value is twice as high as yours, and you're both bidding on customer lifetime value profit, that competitor can outbid you by 300%, right? Because it's not even close, right? If you acquire Andreas and you're going to make $100 and somebody else acquires Andreas, they're going to make $200, and their conversion rate's twice as high as yours, you can bid 4 times more. So it's a huge part of success in advertising is the actual conversion and retention of customers. And if you're not amongst the top in the industry, you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back. And then lastly, I'd say speed of execution. I'd say in the end, by the way, that's what matters most, right? And I call it testing throughput. If your testing throughput is high, like if you can go from having an idea to testing it to scaling it really quickly, you can do a lot of these. You can do hundreds of these in a month, not just one. The odds are you're going to keep improving a lot faster than your competitors. So that skill of test and scale, not just test and learn. Test and learn is important, but test and scale. How many approval layers do you need to go through before you can scale something, or can you just test it and scale it when it works? So those are the 5 things, right? So KPI, data, creative, customer experience, and speed, amongst many other things as well. But if I were to pick 5 things to really lean in as a marketing team in the age of machine learning advertising, I would really lean into those 5 things.
If we compare, Nick, what you're saying with the status quo I'm observing, and probably you in your daily work as well, is that the self-understanding of many marketing departments is, give me more of the same. I want to drive some more efficiency in some area, but basically do the same thing. What you mentioned is, it all starts with strategic alignment. What is my KPI? And there is, that's a huge gap we are currently seeing, because sometimes the target is just drive ROAS, but in reality, it's more. It's about profitability. It's about winning new loyal customers and making profits over the lifetime, and not just initially on the first purchase. And the target itself seems to limit the result you can achieve. So it's critical that the strategic alignment happens. What you mentioned with speed is rather an organizational problem, because KPI sets, they are shared across the entire organization. And oftentimes there's a lot of resistance to move to something else. And then things don't really happen. And the other part you mentioned is kind of the triangle, right? You acquire traffic in a smart way, and you have to align your acquisition strategy with how well you manage to convert traffic on your site, and also how well you retain customers. And only if these three pieces play together, that's where the magic actually happens. If you are brilliant in acquiring traffic, but you don't convert customers, there's no way of making progress and scaling. So it makes a lot.
Exactly.
Let's maybe take a look at how this can actually be done in practice. And we worked together on a large US-based retailer, 8-digit performance advertising budget. They were in a rather traditional setup. So pure short-term focus, revenue optimization, ROAS target, but also still relying on a third-party bidding system. That seems to be the standard setup a couple of years ago. Now it starts changing, but where do you see the limitations of such an approach, and where's the potential that can be unlocked?
Yeah, I mean, that's where almost every retailer was not too long ago, right? Kind of a short-term online ROI, and then the only difference was, what's the ROI target you want to select, and if you want to be more aggressive, you lowered your ROI. If you want to be more conservative, you increased your ROI. By the way, just that alone, like, what is the right ROI target? So for those of you on the call, if you have like a short-term ROI or a CPA target, when I was an advertiser, and I advertised a lot on Google, for example, I had a CPA target of $100. I was a CEO of the company. How did I pick the target? I just made it up. By the way, how do you know I made it up? Because it's too round a number. It's $100. like if you have a CPA of $50 or $100 or $10, it can't be the optimal CPA. It's too round, right? So one idea, even if you don't change the KPI to like short-term ROAS, at the very least, trying to get to the right ROAS that makes you the most amount of money. And how do you do that? Well, you test. You keep your ROAS as is, and then you bid lower and higher for 10% of your volume, and using draft experiments. But at the very least, find a short-term ROAS that makes you the most amount of money. But look, and if you're a retailer and 20% before COVID of your sales came through the internet. And you saw your online marketing as driving internet sales in the age where even almost the great majority of store sales are research online before they bought. You're missing the entire point, right? And the entire point of online advertising is to drive omni-channel sales. And now using smart bidding, you can actually import your store data, not just your online data. So it's actually, I think, strategically, the most important thing for those of you who have a business that's both online and offline, and you have a large offline business, whether it's stores or phones or whatever, whether you're in an insurance business or you're in telco. If COVID has taught us nothing else, then consumers are researching online a lot, and now of course they're buying more online, but they're still going to start buying more in stores when stores start to reopen more aggressively. Think of online marketing as a unified strategy between online and store. It's not an online strategy. The reason for that is because companies tend to put the online marketing into the P&L of the online of the e-commerce team, but the e-commerce team's advertising is driving a lot more than online, right? So I think that's really critical. So number one, make sure the ROAS is right. Number two, make sure it's an omni-channel ROAS. Number three, the next iteration after that is make sure it's a margin ROAS, not a revenue ROAS. And at that point, listen, if you're bidding to an omni-channel margin ROAS and you've optimized at the profit and you have a flexible marketing budget, you're already a top advertiser. At that point, now you can transition to a customer lifetime value margin ROAS, right? And at that point, I mean, you're one of the absolute best in the world. But the way to think about this is to go from where you are to just taking one next step. It's going to be really hard to go from short-term ROAS to 5-year customer lifetime value profit. Right, so just do the next best thing, as the song says in Frozen 2, as my 7-year-old daughter keeps playing over it. Just it's hard to know what to do next, right? And don't try to be perfect, but every single day do the next best thing and get 1% better every day.
Just a quick remark, hearing you, Nick, on this, like the last 2-3 minutes while you were talking, this was all about measurement related stuff. This is all, what are you getting from your advertising, right? Is it just revenue? How much profit? How many new customers? What are repeat purchase you can expect? This is all a measurability problem. I parked my question on this for later on, but I just wanted to point this out. If it's about core capabilities going forward, we have to all become excellent at measuring success and putting our money into the right channels and right segments within the channels. And that's probably where the magic happened. And this is something where we somehow need to get AI to do what matters to our business. And let's take a look. We did a test together with a retailer I mentioned. And so the situation of these guys was plain revenue optimization with a third-party bidding tool. And they understood that going forward, it's more about profitability and not only short-term profits, but also profits through repeat purchases over the lifetime. And let me show a slide here, which highlights the test setup and what we did here. So it's a data activation case, basically. So what we did is we helped that retailer to access first-party data. So we started building data feeds, pulled them from different sources, CRM, order management system, ERP, and put feeds together. These feeds then not only contained revenue information, but order margins, returns, cancellations, but also a flag whether a new or an existing customer bought. What we then did, we set up a side-by-side test. So we let the old approach, third-party bidding system with a revenue target run, and in a different geolocation, we let a fully data-activated approach run. We use tROAS, but we enhanced the data input or refined the data input. And as a third step, we activated the data so Google could see these additional data points. And basically started realizing where the value is, and implicitly the system shifting budgets towards areas which previously didn't look very interesting from a performance perspective, but with refined numbers, the system could see where the magic actually happened. And maybe Nick, you want to, it's interesting to see the KPIs here, the result of that test on the right-hand side. How would you interpret this? We see a 16% increase in revenue, 24% in margin, and 53% in new customer acquisition. How do you explain this?
Well, look, I mean, there were two things that happened at the same time, right? You use machine learning to bid differently. So there was a bidding component, but you also fed it better data, right? So you saw the 16% lift in revenue, which is maybe, you can attribute that largely to maybe the bidding piece, but the reason you got 53% new customers is because you told the machine what was a new customer and what wasn't. And then the reason you get more margin is you also shared the margin, right? So had you not shared better data, you probably would have only gotten the 16% on top and not gotten the other two. So it's a combination of the bidding strategy. So it's a media combination, but it's really a data play as well. And I want to build on something you said. You talked about measurement. Let me break measurement into two camps, right? Measurement, there's the kind of attribution part of it, right? Which will let me leave behind for a second. I think as interesting, if not more interesting, when I think of measurement, and kind of going back to some of the questions that Evan asked in the Q&A, measurement is also a lot about forecasting, right? So imagine, for example, that you're trying to acquire customers, and you as a brand can forecast their lifetime value a lot more accurately than competitors. And then you feed that back to the machine learning algorithm, right? So the odds are that's going to be a big differentiator, and you're going to acquire a lot more of the high CLV customers. So you're going to go back to Evan's questions around how do you do this? Well, you can actually build a lifetime value forecasting algorithm using data, and you can withhold some of the customers back, and then you can actually test using some of the customers you withheld. So you don't have to wait years and years to see if your LTV forecast was right. You can actually do this really quickly. And then the other question on whether or not you should include what happens after in terms of the other marketing investment you make? And the answer is, yeah, you should absolutely do that. So that you acquire based on CLV. And then the second piece after that is you think about how much does it cost me to change and increase the CLV of customers? So for example, when you're acquiring customers, you're trying to maximize your CLV kind of minus the marketing that you're investing. And after that, the other touch points after you've acquired a customer, can you show that their CLVs increased more than the marketing that you're investing? Right. So there's ways to think about this from a new customer acquisition perspective and from an existing customer. But I think that the point I'm making is, if I were to start another company from scratch again, the most important thing I would do is make customer lifetime value the heart and center of the company's overall strategy. I would want to acquire customers who are less likely to churn or more likely to buy over time. I would then try to find out through a lot of testing, what is it that I can do to delight customers so they stay longer, they buy more. So everything will be centered around, did we move customer lifetime value up today? Both through acquiring better customers, but also having interactions, whether, product improvements or the right emails are sent or some paid media that is lifting the customer lifetime value of customers. That wasn't going to happen without that interaction, right? So you can do this through test and control. Here's a bunch of customers, we break down 20%, we take 80% as a test and control. And for the 80% test, we do something. For the 20% control, we don't do it. And then we look at their customer lifetime value before the test. We look at the customer lifetime value after the test. And we see the change in customer lifetime value of both groups. By the way, that also helps to solve a lot of the attribution issues that you may be having, right? Because that's a really clean test to see the impact of that marketing interaction. So the whole idea of testing based on customer lifetime value, to me, is a truly important idea going forward. And advertisers who do this better have a real chance of having significantly better results across their entire industry.
Thanks for sharing your views on this, Nick. Let me support what you just said with a few slides and explain our attendees what happened under the hood. I mean, the test results are really impressive. However, it's very, very consistent what we see. So it's proven that the Google algorithm, Google's AI, of course, reacts to a data input. It's not a hard-coded system. So you have to inform the system what really matters. And let's take this example, and apologies for the slightly nerdy chart here, but I think we can clarify this. So let's assume we are selling a printer and a whiteboard, and both have the same price, $119. And we now spend $50 to sell a printer and a whiteboard. Means that we have a ROAS of 2.4. This is what Google sees in the standard way. So we would bid the same amount to push the printer and the whiteboard. However, they have different margins. Now, if we do a profit-based optimization and the printer has a much lower margin than the whiteboard, Google would see an ROI. Let's define ROI as margin-based, and the ROI on the printer would be $0.5 versus 1.2. So in this scenario, Google would see the whiteboard is more valuable, so it would bid higher to sell the whiteboard. But now, and that's the huge difference, and this is also the reason why we are seeing new customer acquisition has increased that drastically. People who buy a printer tend to buy printer cartridges. So the long-term value of people buying the printer is way higher than people who buy a whiteboard, what you buy like once in 10 years, and you usually don't come back. So the CLV of people purchasing the whiteboard is rather low. So if we include this predictive CLV, predictive residual CLV, then Google would see a lifetime ROI of 4.1 on the printer versus 1.5. Means there's a lot more advertising pressure on a product which previously looked kind of the same as the whiteboard. Hence, we are gonna pull in many more valuable new customers here. And that's basically what happens. To Evan's question, how do you push this back to Google? It's essentially how we do it is it's two components. So it never happens on the front end in the Google Ads interface where you play around with 50,000 different ROAS targets. What we do, we solve this through the conversion tracking actually. So the trick, if you want, is at the very point of time when the transaction happens, you have to tell the bidding system how valuable is the transaction. And in real time, we have little data at hand. What we know is which items were included in the basket. We would know the historical return rate of these items. So we can predict how much is probably going to be returned. Then we get an indication. It's probably a new customer. We haven't checked that. We have a catalog business and something else, so we don't know with certainty. Also tax structures we don't know. But we put an estimation in real time back into the system. In the printer case, and I took that one here, it was $204 lifetime value basically. And then we wait until further information comes in. Could be attribution, could be we now know it wasn't a new customer, but an existing one. So we update the value as soon as we have this additional information. And we use the Google conversion import to overwrite the value the system carried in the database. And that's basically how we make transparent what truly matters to the business. And this is the skill needed, in our opinion, that companies will have to adopt in order to invest in a smart way. And instead of I'm getting better in managing my keyword lists, that's no longer anything in our opinion that will move the needle. Right. All right. Nick, I read something on LinkedIn from your fellow Googler Neil Hoyne, and Neil posted something he called the 9X effect. And the 9X effect describes a situation where companies that innovate believe that their innovation is the greatest thing on earth, and they overestimate the value of innovation, while the buyer tends to be fine with a solution he or she has, and rather underestimates the value by factor 3. So overall, there's a gap of a 9X. And I'm saying this because it's very interesting. We had a client early on in 2011, I guess. And for these guys, we were already activating profit data. And we had a business model in place, revenue model, where we took a percentage of the bottom line profits after Google spend. So at some point, the CEO called me and said, Andreas, why don't I see my ad here? I told him, because it's not profitable. If we bid higher, we lose money. And then he said, yeah, but hold on, we are winning new customers here. This is profitable, but not on the first purchase. So at that point, we started putting a flat average value for a new customer back into our proprietary bidding system at that point of time. And a few companies hopped onto this. We did this for many companies, ASOS, About You, Revolve, and many more. But the broader market did not really adopt these strategies due to organizational resistance, sometimes due to technical problems. What do you feel as you're working exactly on this? Has this started to become adopted by the broader market? Is this still something for just plain nerds? Where do you see this currently?
No, Andreas, thanks for that. No, I think now that people have really switched to machine learning a lot, and that part is getting more and more anchored in. People are asking those questions now for the first time sometimes, right? I mean, doing this kind of highly complex optimization on customer lifetime value profit can be done manually, but it's really hard. So as the adoption of machine learning has really increased a lot, people now have the technology in place to do so. So we're seeing a lot of advertisers really interested in profits and customer lifetime value. So there's a lot of projects going on right now. And we're starting to see a lot of the impact of that, and some case studies are coming out. So no, I think it's becoming quite mainstream now, but still not that many advertisers have really fully implemented it yet.
Um, let's skip one of my questions because we don't have that much time left. But maybe let me share one observation, Nick. I mean, at Crealytics, we're working together with Google since 2008. So we have a pretty long journey, and we always had a retail only focus. We didn't do anything else. And from what I sense, but also when I talk to peers in my industry, I feel Google has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. And what I'm observing is that Google has actually built lots of very advertiser-friendly tools. And it's my impression that this isn't always designed for maximizing short-term Google profits. I mean, just to mention a few, the free inclusion of products in Google Shopping is one, which is clearly not a profit driver on the Google side. Also, incrementality testing is something we've seen Google pushing quite a bit, which might lead to a situation where there's less budget going into retargeting, which is big, so short-term might not be ideal. Can you put this into perspective of the broader Google retail strategy?
Now, yeah, well, thank you for the nice things you just said. Well, look, when you think about retail strategy, it's got three components. It's got well, let's just focus on two. It's got the consumer and it's got the advertising ecosystem. So for consumers, look, consumers are very demanding, right? They want very little friction. They want to find things really quickly. They want to buy really quickly. So you've seen our retail products really evolve in that direction to make it a lot easier for consumers to buy, and also for e-commerce and omnichannel retailers to be able to do things like that and make it easier for their consumers to buy. So that's things are really designed with the consumer in mind first. Number one. Number two, from an advertising perspective, yeah, it's really important that we have a really vibrant retail ecosystem around the world. So we're trying to make it easier for advertisers to upload their products, to share margin data, and so on and so forth. So the strategy is just less friction, more automation, more profitability, and again, really using machine learning to automate as much of the media as possible, but also making it easier to share what really matters, which is the right data, the right KPIs, and so on and so forth. So as you saw with like our feed-based advertising systems, for example, with smart shopping and things like that, we're trying to make it easier. And now if you look at what's coming down in terms of some of the big products that we're launching, like Performance Max, for example, which really contains a lot of the Google stack, right? It's most of Google's performance advertising products, except for keyword search and a couple of others. You could literally go into that product and ask it for an ROI, and it just happens almost automatically. So it's just this lowering the complexity, lowering the friction, making it easier for advertisers and agencies to do the media piece. So as you were saying before, they can focus on the incredibly important creative data KPI alignment piece. Because I agree with what you said before. The absolute most important thing for most advertisers is having key, complete alignment on what they're trying to accomplish between the CEO, the CFO, the agency, the CMO, Google, and having one dashboard that they really agree on. Like, despite the fact that measurement isn't perfect, despite the fact that there's some uncertainty around it, the top advertisers in the world agree what the dashboard looks like. A trick, by the way, on that one is to put like plus or minus error bars around it. Like, hey, last week we made, we invested X, we made 5X of cash flow, plus or minus 20%. Right. I think one of the really big, you mentioned, we talked about some of the skill sets that really matter. And I talked about moving fast and testing fast. That requires an underpinning, a structure of testing that you believe in. And that starts with a good testing methodology, but also a measurement system that people, while they think it's not perfect, can actually hang their hat on to some extent and know that when they're testing something, the results are close to reality. So in the end, being able to understand what's happening is critical to day-to-day activity, but also critical to rapid improvement.
So you all heard it. Google is generally interested in having a healthy retail ecosystem, and lots of the initiatives can be explained this way, like really make sure that the overall retail market, and we know there's one incumbent strong player around, and it's probably Google's mission to help everyone to be as good as possible in how you invest your budget, how you acquire traffic, and that all this is successful. I would suggest I stop here because we have lots of questions coming in, and I would like to give people the opportunity to ask these questions now, or we're going to pick them and give these guys answers. Nick, thanks a lot. This was really amazing. I enjoyed myself talking to you. Could have continued for another 2 hours, but we are running out of time. So let's tackle the questions. And I give it to Mark now.
I'm coming. Hi. So we had a couple of questions come in that were already answered during the event. So we're going to skip over those and let's jump to Javier's question, which talks a little bit about scale. How much data is needed to create this type of data activation system? Is there a minimum level of traffic or advertising investment in Google that's necessary?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give it a shot. I mean, Andreas and Mark, you can share your experience as well. So as long as you meet the minimum threshold for smart bidding, right? So if you're using target ROAS, for example, and it's working well, all we're talking about is, so you saw the Andreas's example with the printer and the whiteboard, I thought was really a good example. You're still just sharing one piece of data with the machine, right? So you're sharing a number. $100, $200, $300 after each conversion, and then you ask the machine to hit a certain ROAS of that number. But that number could be anything. It could be short-term revenue, it can be short-term margin, it can be customer lifetime value. So you're basically not changing the media strategy. You're just changing the number. That's it, right? So for example, you can move from having a 5-to-1 revenue ROAS to having a 2-to-1 margin ROAS. And now all you do is you pass margin data and you bid on that as opposed to bidding on revenue. So if you are getting successful results now by using machine learning, you're going to get, you're meeting the minimum threshold for doing, I mean, everything Andreas, Mark, and I talked about today. That doesn't change. If you're not meeting the thresholds for smart bidding, then, but yeah, you need to find ways to have more conversions going forward.
Not much to add here. It's the same data volume, same number of conversions. It's just a different data input the AI will operate on. Where it becomes more difficult is on the CLV prediction side. Why? Because let's say a very new business with no history, it's very, very hard to predict what a newly acquired customer will do over time. Generally, CLV predictions, it's a very specific CLV prediction case here, because usually you have a long history. You go into your CRM, you see people who are active customers for 2-3 years, and then it's very easy to predict what these guys are going to do. The specific use case here is there's a single conversion happening, the first conversion of someone. So the way we do this is we go into the CRM, we find similar orders, if you want lookalikes, people who have bought similar items, similar basket, similar price from a certain location, similar payment method, and so on. And then we predict what this individual will yield over time. This is fairly accurate, although there's not much data. But a new business with no history, it's very hard. I would still recommend to not use this as an excuse to not put some value in there. It's better to estimate something that is wrong than neglecting it to the full extent. It's clear that the customer lifetime value isn't zero. And most businesses who don't work that way, they somehow try to factor the same thinking into a ROAS target. So ultimately they're getting the same, but in a kind of flawed approach.
Yeah, let me take a hypothetical example in terms of new business. One of the really great ways to start on this journey is by keeping it really, really simple, right? So let's take an example. You start a cruise company, right? And you are okay with spending 20% of all the cruise bookings online in terms of marketing. You want a 5-to-1 ROI, right? So you work with Andreas's team and you say, hey, I want a 5-to-1 ROI. So somebody books a $1,000 cruise, you pay $200 in marketing. Somebody books a $10,000 cruise, you pay $2,000 in marketing, right? So that's your heuristic. You start with this idea of I want to pay 20% back into marketing. Well, what it's going to do, right? The machine learning is going to eventually bid more for more expensive cruises, and then it's going to sell more luxury cruises, which is good because you make more money in luxury cruises. So that's kind of the margin piece of this, right? You're making more money based on the value of each cruises, based on revenue. Well, what if you had a hypothesis, because you've been working in the cruise industry for a while, that wealthy retirees are much more likely to come back than newlyweds, for example, which is probably true in the cruise industry, right? So I imagine changing your heuristic and the deal that you make with Andreas and his team, and you say, hey, Andreas, I'll pay 20% of the value of a cruise back into marketing, and I'll pay 25% for somebody who's 65 and above and has, and lives in these particular zip codes in New York City or whatever heuristic you want to have, right? Wealthy retirees. Well, that's probably right, number one, but maybe not, but probably right. And number two, you're bidding just a little bit higher for people like that. They're probably worth 3 times more than the average, but you're only bidding, 30% more. So even if you're really wrong, you're not going to have, a massive problem because you're not bidding that much more. Over time, as you discover that wealthy retirees are 10 times more valuable than the average, maybe you want to be a lot more aggressive and bid 3 times higher for them. But the trick when you start is make one simple assumption about customers and the quality of customers over time that you think is the most likely to be true, number one. And then number two, just do something that's very conservative so you don't bid that much more for them. And then you test it over time, and then you start to learn whether or not you are right about these kinds of customers. And then you start being more aggressive over time. But to Andreas' point, from day one of your strategy, have LTV in the center of it, despite the fact you don't really know the LTV. Start thinking that way from the start. And maybe for the first few months, it's just all I'm going to do in the first few months is try to understand LTV. Maybe I'm not going to use it to bid, but you should have LTV baked in from day one of your strategy. And if you're already doing a bunch of stuff, starting tomorrow, LTV baked in, and it may take you a year to transition, but start talking about it, start putting it in the center of your strategy, start looking at historical data to understand. If all you did, by the way, is to look back in history, do you know your revenue and your profit concentration, right? Do you know what percentage of customers drove 80% of your revenue over the last 2 years? If you don't know that, right, because you're only looking at orders, you got to go and look at customers, right? And maybe you'll discover that, my goodness, only 15% of my customers drove 80% of my revenue. You may also discover, by the way, that the behavior of customers you saw during COVID was very different than what you saw before, and you may have to make some adjustments, right? Think about customers and not the average customer. Think about customer segmentation based on customer lifetime value, right? Customers, no average, no average, no average. That's, the mindset. It's not about orders, it's about customers. It's not about the average LTV. It's about Andreas's value to the business. And how do I delight Andreas in order to have Andreas's LTV go up? That's the trick. And that's what the best in the world do. Just an amazing focus on customer lifetime value and how to acquire high LTV customers in the first place. And as importantly, how to increase customer lifetime value of existing customers every single day through big programs, like big strategic moves, right? But also just trying tiny little things every day to move customer lifetime value up.
Okay.
Perfect closing statement. There was nothing better we could have said. I know there are a few questions we could not answer. I'd like to encourage everyone who has further questions to approach me directly. Happy to have a chat and hopefully be able to answer your question.
Nick, Andy, thank you so much for the participation. Guys, if anybody who's listening has questions, you can find us, of course, at Crealytics.com or find us on LinkedIn. All three of us are available and open to answering questions that you have, and hope that we continue the conversation. Most of all, Nick, thank you so much. It was great to hear your perspective, and I think that we all got the message that it is customers and not transactions. Improve the customer experience, you improve your business.
Good stuff.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.